Direct overhead, black and white, for uploading reptilian shapeshifter movies. No, it's not black and white, it's something else, but still a gang-stalking helicopter, nonetheless. And that's for uploading reptilian shapeshifter movies to YouTube, believe it or not. Okay, we have an arrival at the vehicle buzz, so as I'm just approaching my car, we're going to get a direct overhead over here. Nope, not a direct overhead, but a flyby. He knows I got the camera out. This is for uploading reptilian shapeshifter movies to YouTube and exposing the fact that we have non-humans that actually shapeshift from reptilian form into human form to hide themselves among us so that they can eat us like food. In fact, there's reptilians that come here and they call Earth the buffet because of the selection of humans that they have available to eat. Yeah, and your government's not telling you because they are the government.
But my sister visited Earth in Kandahar in underground bases there, and she likes to call Earth the buffet. And she said that she ate about 12 different humans when she was visiting here. You have to remember these beings are billions of years more or millions of years more advanced than we are, and they consider human beings as lower beings, so they think that they should be able to eat them. Reptilians also eat other different types of beings, not just humans, and just like how we eat cows and chickens and pigs because we think they're lower than us, so they just, that's their perception on humans, so they just come here and feast, and they go back to their fourth dimension or whatever planet they're in the third dimension, and then they do their thing. So
All right, is this thing working? All right. Okay. So I want to do this in a more organized way, but then again, sometimes spontaneously and going for a walk is the best talk. And this guy from MIB has given me some more documents about his trip to Titan and more information about the Andorians. Now, the Andorians are these light blue skinned aliens from the outer solar system, or they have more colonies on the outer solar system because they prefer it cold, like as in negative 300 degrees. Yeah, that's like one of their, I think that's their comfortable temperature. So whenever they interact with humans and whatnot, they either have suits on, or like if it's at a base, they have like a divided section. So there's a glass section. They can still socialize and talk with them. Apparently they're good at speaking English, and but there's like a glass partition, and that's what they talk behind. But he says in some situations they can be in the same atmosphere for shorter periods of time. Basically the Andorians, or I had to get my pronunciations right. I have to send them a list of stuff that I can be sure and pronounce right, because there's all these names on this other historical document that I want to set forward, which is really what I want to talk about, the premise now of his time travel back to Camelot, guys. Back to Camelot. Holy crap, dude. Now, the Arthurian legend was always something kind of near and dear to my heart, because I always consider Britain the mother country. It really is to a lot of white Americans, and so it was something rather special. And but this I want to make clear before I tell you everything about it. First of all, I wouldn't even bother to share it with you guys if I didn't believe this guy was on the level. You know, you get the, I'm always suspicious at first, and you got to be careful, and you can always still, get wrong information, and people can be lying and all that kind of thing. But it's a situation where you make a decision, and maybe you're right, and maybe you're wrong. Yeah, guys. So the premise is this gentleman, again, I'll just refer to him as Armstrong, went back in time. He was given a mission, and the setup is, okay, I had to kind of parse this out a little bit because he gave me a writing. He's a good writer, and I want to read it, but I want to kind of set it up because it's a little bit confusing for me, because there's two things that could be, well, at least two main things that could be true about it. And who knows what the real truth is. It could be a mixed timeline, like a merging of timelines, or somebody messed with the timeline, and it's very different than what most people think. Now, just a little backstory on the Arthurian legend. So for this, I did some research, and it turns out, as you'll find if you look into this, what the earliest known records of where the Arthurian legend came from. So in case you're not familiar with the Arthurian legend, it's a story about a 5th century king who rules over a kingdom called Camelot, and it's where we get the famous sword in the stone, the sword of choosing, where it's like this divinely caused situation where only the rightful ruler of Britain can pull the sword out of the stone. And I always thought that was really cool. I loved the original movies about it, and they made a movie later in my kind of life about it that I thought was pretty good, called Excalibur. And so there's, you know, all this, but now of course, just to be clear, that a lot of the stuff is, of course, going to be, you know, fantasy and, you know, retelling of the tale, but exaggerated, and so, you know, who knows where there's any real history, but apparently there was. And I looked into it, and it turns out that one of the main sources is actually this guy from, I think it was, I forget the year. Anyway, it's way back, maybe the 900s or something like that, 900 AD, or maybe a little bit later. I don't know. Maybe the 13th century. But in any case, this guy is Geoffrey of Monmouth. Okay, so that's how he's identified. There's no last name, just Geoffrey of Monmouth, and Monmouth is a location there in Britain. And now, see, most historians and you know, people, experts, and all that, they believe that it was actually a fictional document. What becomes interesting about this is if you are a godly man, okay, so you go by God's word in the scripture, you will be able to recognize someone else, at least, who is godly, unless they're very, very good at faking it. But chances are that someone who professes Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, someone who writes from a Christian perspective, someone who quotes the Bible, which is everything that Geoffrey did, is someone that is more likely, at least, to be telling the truth. We still, of course, we don't know. But I had to say, I read his entire work, British history. There's a Latin name for it, Bretonum something, but I read his entire work translated in this work that you can find online, read for free, called 6 Old English Chronicles. And now, guys, this writing that I read, the testimony of Geoffrey of Monmouth, including the prophecies of Merlin, is in itself a fascinating find. Because I, Richard Bruce, am saying I believe in him. I believe he's telling the truth, and that someone like that, who also makes a point, not only in the beginning of it, but, you know, when he's talking about a little bit about himself, he's humbly saying he doesn't want to make it about himself. He wants to, you know, just, you know, make the translation out of this old book of the English kings. And he mentions in the beginning of it that he says, I noticed that these other historians, some of which either came before him or were in contemporaries of his time, made no mention of many of the things of the kings that came before Jesus Christ, and made no mention of King Arthur. And now again, most historians and people who you know, the experts, the so-called experts that you know, I trust those people. Oh, we're getting the real history from them. All right, so I was going to give it a fair shot, and I could tell you reading it. Okay, now the real Arthurian legend it does have miracles and stuff in it. Okay, and dragons and what might be magical swords, or it might be magical powers, but slaying of a lot of men by one person, as we know Samson did in the Bible, slew 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass. So there's a lot of things like that in it, to where you can see why a lot of historians and serious people, oh well, this must be fiction, you know. There's no magical swords and all this stuff. But I, Richard Bruce, am telling you, I believe that this actually, the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth, it's pronounced this weird way, I can't even understand why they use a G and an O just to say Geoffrey. But anyway, that's why they did it in the ancient past. So anyway, I believe that you can tell. See, to me, as a godly man who now, as you guys know, my point, a lot of Christians don't have this, and I see the lacking as a result in a proper understanding of things. The Psalm 12:6, for the words of the Lord are pure words. Okay, so that being the case, I'm able to look at something else from a godly man who believed in Jesus Christ. He was a Christian. Geoffrey of Monmouth was a Christian, and you can tell in the writing. He even and there's other quotes in Scripture from the Book of the British Kings that he largely references from, because he says another contemporary gave him this book of these chronicles, which apparently since then is lost. Otherwise, we would have a corroborating account of this. So it was in, I guess it was in Hebrew. No, it was in Greek, it was in the ancient British language, whatever that was, the Celtic or whatever that was, and he translated it into Latin, and then somebody now has translated it into modern English for us, because Old English was, I don't know what it was, like a mix of Latin or whatever. I should really do my history up. Not a history buff. But in any case, the English that we speak now is much different than the English that they spoke then. Okay? And now, before I get into, except I want to do a really, a precise report on the Arthurian legend according to Geoffrey of Monmouth. But before I do that, let me just summarize what the mission of this MIB Armstrong was and what happened. So, and just so you know, it's a very different take on it, which again, I don't think he's lying, but then again, it's so different from what Geoffrey describes that I don't know what to make of it. I'm still in the process of, I've been asking him questions all this time. The Armstrong, I've been asking him, through email. I say, look, and he's very cooperative. He's very willing to talk, and he's literate, and because like I said, he's made these good writings, very good writings, and a complete report on his mission back in time to the 5th century. Because what happened was, the story is that at MIB headquarters they have a time division. Okay, I don't know what it's called, their time division, whatever, but so someone noticed an anomaly in the timeline. They said, somebody said, something about King Arthur having was a blacksmith, and he had a harem, And then somebody, well, I don't remember anything like that. And so somebody became suspicious of somebody screwing with the timeline. So they decided to put together a mission. And by the way, I'm just not entirely clear exactly on that whole thing, you know. And we may never be really totally clear about what all you got there. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's kind of, you know, there's a lot that we may not be able to find out, like exactly why they did the mission and everything. But the upshot is, they get into the no room. So that's what this. And by the way, they use a Star Trek shuttle to move it around. He says one of the old style Star Trek shuttles. So remember, from the original Star Trek, a shuttle that kind of looks like that was on top of this 30-foot by 30-foot metal cube called a no room, which is the time machine, and they go back in time. So they go back to the 5th century. It takes them a while to find where the original Camelot was supposed to be, and King Arthur and everything, and they do. They eventually find it in a town called Carwent, which is actually still there. It was the ruins of a former Roman base, because the Romans used to be, you know, they occupied Britain and they were the rulers, and Britain had to pay tribute to Rome for a while and all that kind of stuff. So the Romans are all intertwined with that, you know, because the Romans were the rulers of the world for quite some time, and they were the authority there for a while. But he says that when he came to there wasn't any knights, there wasn't any castles. The towns were, see, back then they didn't have any indoor plumbing or trash control or whatever, and the towns just bloody stunk like hell, so bad that he said that they were thinking about going to London or some other major cities, but they decided, man, this stinks so bad. Let's just stay out in the country. We'll stay in the no room, get our mission done, and then get back to 2011 is when they did this. Okay, so this is 2011 that he was talking about, and so they go there, and guess what? He finds all the characters from the Arthurian legend. Okay, King Arthur himself, a man named Arwell Edwards, who was slightly chubby, but he had skinny legs but big strong arms, because he was a blacksmith who was constantly hammering stuff. He says he's very dirty. He usually wore like a pullover, and he had a receding hairline. I'll show a picture of it here. I did this AI rendering, and although I couldn't get the AI rendering to put a little bit more hair on him, because that was the only criticism that Armstrong had of this, but he said that this is actually very accurate to what he saw. And he said to me, anybody would recognize this Arwell as well. I mean, he called him Arwell Edwards, but he wasn't called King Arthur. But if it could very well be that actually, because he names this writing the real story of King Arthur. But it could be that was the real King Arthur. Now, here's the interesting backstory to him. Okay, before I get to the rest of the characters, Guinevere, Lancelot, Gawain, Merlin, all them. And by the way, they weren't magical as they are in the account of Geoffrey of Monmouth's rendition. It was much more mundane. And so what I want to try to say to you folks is, who may also be like me and have a lot of respect and love for the Arthurian legends, kind of like a you know, the magical God-approved knights of armor of our past. You know, I always felt that way. The sword and the stone, and there was just something about that story, and there still is to me. That's magical, and I think maybe magical, and it's also in future renditions people called Arthur the once and future king. But in this possible blowing away of that entire fantasy, the real King Arthur, then once again called Arwell Edwards, was actually a spontaneous time jumper himself, a man from the 19th century, so the 1800s, and he said that he was just walking, he was a mobile blacksmith in the 1800s, he said around 1870, and he sat down for a nap with his horse, and when he woke up, he started walking, and then he noticed right away the path and the trees looked a little bit different. And then he noticed that the town wasn't there. And he said, oh crap, then he went back to his house, and his house was gone. And turns out he had spontaneously, according to Armstrong, spontaneously somehow time jumped with his horse and cart back to the 5th century, so the 400s, okay? And so by the time Armstrong and his team showed up with the time machine, the no room, with a Star Trek shuttle carrying it, and with a invisibility cloak and everything, and they were all outfitted with gear and stuff of the time. By the time he went back there, it was 489 AD, okay? So Orwell Edwards, a 19th century man, spontaneously time jumped back to the 5th century, okay? And he had already established his king. In fact, what happened was, so since he was a blacksmith, since he found himself in the 5th century, he became famous because the word traveled around that there was a great blacksmith around. And so, and then he got involved in the wars because they're always looking for weapons and they're always fighting, and there's wars between the Britons and the Romans and the Saxons and the Picts and all those that later became the Scots and the Irish and the Saxons, the Saxons are basically German, of German ancestry, and then Anglo-Saxon just means that they had basically lived on the British Isle for quite some time, so that's why they're called Anglo-Saxons, if I'm understanding that correctly. But in any case, it was a mix of white races, the Romans, and everything else. They all interbreeding there. The French, all kinds of people was what made up the British island. And so anyway, what it is they had like a little earpiece that was the universal translator, so they could understand the people from that era, because they spoke a different, the language of course wasn't basic English. But he says he didn't realize at first when Orwell was talking to him that actually he wasn't hearing the translator. It was that he was speaking to him in an old style of English, and so the translator wasn't translating it. He was actually hearing him speak in a language that was understandable to us because it was close enough to our time. So it's really fascinating, and all these details he's describing about this. So what happened to Orwell Edwards when he found himself shifted back to the 5th century is that he became famous for his blacksmith abilities, which were advanced because he was from the 19th century. So then he got employed by various armies and stuff, and then they were so successful in their campaigns that this one guy that was like with him as this main dude, they were going to have him as the king, but the men for some reason liked Orwell, maybe because as Armstrong was explaining, maybe because he was easier to please than this other guy that was more of an aristocrat of the time. So they have higher expectations or whatever, maybe a little bit more stuck up, whatever, But they liked Orwell. They made him king because of his excellent blacksmith skills. They were so successful in the military campaigns that he was involved in. They made him king. And this sounds like that whole thing. If it's made up, by the way, it's a great plot. Whoever thought of it is a genius. But no, like I said, I've been talking with Armstrong for some time, a couple months now, and I think he's on the level, and it's very, very interesting, and I think he's telling the truth about what he saw. Now, was he really? There's a lot of questions. I know that you're going to have listening to this. I still have, just so you understand, I'm with you on that. I'm not trying to pass this off like I know for sure anything, really. I'm just telling you that I think this guy was truthful with me. He really did see that, and the other people were there with him. He says when he first came into this room to talk to the king, because he finally made it to Derwent, which they determined was the location of the original Camelot. They somehow figured that out, and so they end up in this town in Britain called Derwent, which was a former Roman base. They go in, and it's this picture that I did with AI, where he described. There was this woman in a purple dress sitting behind a desk, and she was kind of like an impressive, good-looking woman, and she was like, her name was Senovera in that time. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Senovera. Their names were longer back then. Anyway, that was supposedly Guinevere, okay, which Arwell was, you know, in the chorus of them making him king and everything else. She was running the country basically. She was some kind of an aristocrat leadership figure there in Carwent and or Camelot. It's kind of easy to see how that might have been turned into Camelot. But in any case, she was running the kingdom, so he was advised to marry her, and that's how she became his wife. However, it turns out that she liked girls. Yeah, a little bit deflating there. Oh look, we're getting a welcome buzz. Here we go. Your taxes for gang stalking, for uploading reptilian shapeshifter movies to YouTube. That guy just made a circle just so he could pass directly overhead, which is hard to prove because they do pass a lot by here on the beach, but the only reason I'm saying that's a stalk is because he came right off right there, and just right like out, and then just to get overhead. But anyway, maybe not. So I like to catalog that as part of my record here for whatever it might be worth. So it really is a fascinating story that we've got with this time jump. So now I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna do like a complete read of his report. Anyway, another thing about Arwell is that apparently he had a harem, and it was part of some deal when he married Senovera Guinevere. And Merlin was this guy named Murden who had long black hair, and he was very deliberate when he spoke, and he was younger, like 30 years old, not like you see in the legends, you know, like some old wizard. He was younger, and he was basically just a general, and he was also from an aristocratic sort of situation. You know, he wasn't like a peasant. You know, he was from a family of means, I think. And he said something about you know, something about his prowess with literature or something like that, as to what they ascribed to him being a magician, as the legend says. But of course, you know, it's so far back, and there's so many things we don't know. So it is confusing what the actual what really happened. But basically, the upshot of it was that his mission, Armstrong's mission, was to fix anything that might be amiss, and basically remove anyone that wasn't supposed to be there. So a lot of other details happened, but I'm just concluding the story that what happened in the end is that they absconded with, or abducted basically, King Arthur. And because apparently he wasn't supposed to be there, and somebody knows something in the time jump, whatever. I don't know what their reasoning was. And you know, and apparently, and there's this other British agency that's kind of like a, you know, a CIA, FBI, whatever, that does paranormal stuff, but is actually a pretty old organization that deals with all this really crazy stuff that, you know, that the American government is, you know, also associated with, you know, crazy stuff, time travel, human genetic mixing, super soldiers, secret space program, all this stuff. But they were primarily dealing with all these monsters and stuff. But so some agents from that British agency were there, and they wanted to take Arwell, who they brought back to 2011, back to their base in Britain, which kind of makes sense because he was British. So, and he says at first he was kind of delighted to see, because he was really into Arwell, the 19th century man, was really interested in technology and stuff. So when he saw the stuff from the 21st century, he was like, "Whoa, man, this is balls out in front." So he really liked that. But altogether, he was bitter at having been taken out of his kingdom, which I said to Armstrong, I don't blame him. But Armstrong was given a directive. He was following orders So that's why I said, I know it wasn't you, but I mean, I kind of thought, just having a place in my heart for the King Arthur legend, if that was the real King Arthur, and you took him out of his environment where he was a king, he had a harem, he was, just think, and then bring him to the 21st century where he's a nobody, and he's kind of cooped up in this British agency, and he says he died in 2019. I don't know what he died of, but he says that's what happened. And in his honor, they made a life-size statue of him in his prime to put in their smoking lounge in this British agency called Albany. I forget. I actually have to ask this guy how it's pronounced, but I'll get into more detail. It's like a secret British agency, and so he went with them, and that was the only thing that he said that his superiors criticized him for the mission, was that he didn't bring Arwell Edwards back to America, which actually he might have been happier here, because Britain's kind of a little bit on the foggy and dark side. But at the time, you could see why that makes sense, because he was British, and the British agents from that agency wanted to take him back to Britain, and it kind of, after all is said and done. But the reason why that British agency came to America was because we had the time travel technology that they don't. They don't have that capability. According to him, I have no idea what the actuality is. So where this differs from the author of legend is the name. Now, again, I can see why probably average viewers may wonder why I would say that I trust the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth, and I don't have a more, suspicious attitude about it. Whereas I also believe in this testimony that Armstrong gives, which he believes was the real King Arthur, and yet simultaneously not. I'm still trying to determine, because you see, he thinks that maybe Arwell Edwards stepped in and there was another King Arthur, or at least it sounds that way to me. I haven't even been able to determine that. But basically, that he wasn't the real King Arthur, that he may have stepped into his shoes somehow, and that may have been why Arwell time jumped from the 19th century to the 5th, because he was, it was like the timeline correcting itself, maybe, I don't know. So just so you understand a few differences, I'll go over the later, a more complete detail about what the Geoffrey of Monmouth account of King Arthur is. But Arthur's name was Arthur Pendragon, because he was the son of Uther, with a U, Uther Pendragon, and King Arthur began to reign when he was 15 because of the death of his father, according to what I was reading there. But in any case, so that's obviously completely different than Arwell Edwards spontaneously time jumping back in time. He wouldn't have had any parents or anything like that in that time. And then in the Geoffrey of Monmouth's account, I didn't see anything about a sword and a stone, but there was Merlin, who was apparently, it looks like he was the son of a half human, half pixie or angel, whatever, not angel, but fairy, from the, or incubus, who had apparently relations with his mother, and she bore a child, and that was Merlin. And Merlin gives these very interesting and long and incomprehensible, to me anyway, prophecies, and all this really interesting stuff, and his fame in that story, whether it's true or not, and I'm, like I said, I'm leaning towards believing that is true, like 100%, because if you fear God, and you even say in there, in several places, talking about the problem of people bearing false witness or saying things that are false, lies, you're just, you know, it's going to be a little bit less likely to me that you're going to write down a lie. Now, it may be that this chronicle that he was given was based upon lots of exaggerations that ballooned from actually something more ordinary, such as Arwell Edwards, the mobile blacksmith, who became king of Britain for a while, or at least of that area, because there was, like I said, there was all these different factions in Britain that controlled various parts of it. But that story, and by the way, it's a fascinating read. Regardless, I highly recommend it. It's not that long. I mean, it's maybe, you know, take you. It's like, let's see, how many pages would you say it is? I would say maybe 150 pages, something like that. It's not that long, you know, something about the size of maybe a short novel. But it may actually be the accurate history of our forefathers, our British forefathers. And so that's that's basically the setup. And there's a lot more interesting detail and stuff and things that he said, which will be more authenticated, as it were, if I read his account, so you can see that I'm actually reading from something. I'm not, you know, blowing smoke off the top of my head here. But it's very interesting nonetheless. And you know, once again, whether, you know, what really happened, whether, you know, the real story. See, I realize that the more mundane explanation of King Arthur is probably right, but this world isn't ordinary, and our reality isn't ordinary. God didn't make an ordinary reality here. We see from his words in the scripture, his pure and holy word, in the authorized King James Bible, we see that it is a world of fantastic creatures and things that happen. Not just him doing these things, but all kinds of weird and interesting stuff that defies a normal, rational explanation of what all we see, or that outlook of life. That, you know, the normie, scientific-based. I'm not anything against science. I like science, and I do believe that there's a scientific explanation for everything. But we of faith know that faith is described as knowing but not knowing for sure, and this is necessary to building the character, our individual character in our lives, that we might be ready for the kingdom of God, if so be that we show ourselves worthy. But so I don't know whether it's the more fantastical version, which is basically best and most covered by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and that story does include things like his sword was called Caliburn, not Excalibur, so you can kind of see, you know, how that developed. So and at one point with Caliburn, he goes out to fight and slays 470 men in one go, just by himself. And it is not clear to me, at least it wasn't clear when I read it, whether that was the sword or whether it was him, Arthur himself, Arthur Pendragon. Okay. And I know some of you watching by reptilian interested folks might be thinking that the name Pendragon indicates that he was a reptilian shapeshifter. Who knows? Maybe he was. I don't know, and my guess would be not. But you know, one thing is that dragons, I think, were available to be seen back then. They were becoming more rare, but you could still see dragons on occasion. Because at one point, the reason why Merlin becomes famous in the myth is that they looked for a child that didn't have a father, and when they by chance they found this mother who described that she had been with this like half fairy, half whatever, and one thing led to another, but she got pregnant and she had Merlin. So at one point, so they found this Merlin fellow who helped them solve a problem, because this one king was trying to escape from being attacked by these other people who were trying to get him, and he was trying to build this tower, but every time the workers went out to work on this tower, it sank into the earth, and like some kind of curse or something. And so they said that if you sacrifice a child without a father, you will appease the gods and you will be able to build on top of this. Well, when they bring Merlin out there, they're thinking about doing all this, and then he rebukes those wizards, those wise men who were telling him this, telling him that they need to sacrifice a kid. He says the reason why is because there's a pond underneath, and if you dig up the pond, drain the pond, you will find 2 eggs, and in the eggs are dragons. And they do so. They drain the pond, they find the eggs hatch, and there's a white dragon and a red dragon in these eggs, and they start fighting in the pond, in this drained pond, and this, that, and the other happens. I forget exactly what happens, but one of them prevails, and then gets wounded, and then another one was victorious or something else. It's supposed to be basically an analogy of the future, where King Arthur is successful in driving out the invading Saxons from Britain. And of course, again, once again, who knows what the reality actually is? But that was the legend of Merlin the Wizard. And again, I just because Geoffrey of Monmouth was a godly man, a Christian like me, and believed that God sees and knows everything, and he's very clearly against those who love and make a lie, which writings of John in Revelation were available by then. Well, you're going to be less likely to write down a big freaking lie. But then again, I realize from a more realistic point of view, and also I'm biased, because I want to believe in the legend of King Arthur. Because like it was something kind of significant to my youth and my understanding of our background, that there was this the Knights of the Round Table, and King Arthur, the king with divine authenticity, because he was able to pull the sword from the stone, and then at the end when he gets betrayed by Lancelot and Guinevere, but then he fights his Mordred or whatever that guy was, and so forth. Then he returns the sword to the lady in the lake, which I think those details are not those details were not in the writings of Geoffrey of Monmouth, which is where the whole Arthurian legend comes from. And I think those were added later. But as we know from Scripture, sometimes things that were not known or written down at the time are written down by later authors who were given the correct information, which they can get from angels or God or whatever. The information is known. So it is. It's quite interesting in any case, and it's interesting to look back and find out. It is a little bit discouraging, because that you can't find like what was it? What was the real story? Was it anything like the Geoffrey of Monmouth tale, or was it more mundane? And this guy, this 19th century mobile blacksmith, actually was the real King Arthur, and they basically screwed him out of his kingdom. But which I just on a personal level, I was a little bit like I kind of stated my objection there to Armstrong, even though I know he's not in charge, he was following orders and everything. But I just think they should have left him there. That's my feeling. They should have left him. They should have left him there. I mean, he was in his kingdom, because they brought him back, and he was kind of out of his element in the 21st century. He didn't have any skills to make it, and basically to keep a lid on him and everything, they kept him kind of, I don't know what happened, the story of his life, but he didn't live long after that. He lived 8 years after they brought him back, and he was still a relatively young man. So, but I don't know, maybe he wasn't healthy, eating a lot of beef and stuff, which, by the way, you shouldn't do. But and he was overweight. So, maybe he just died of natural causes. But I just think that it kind of sucks that they robbed him of his glorious kingdom in any case. But hey, they may have been right. Maybe he was an aberrant element in that time that shouldn't be there, and they did the right thing to bring him back. Armstrong said that he felt they did the right thing because he knew that he wasn't supposed to be there, and their people in the time division noticed a discrepancy, and so forth and so on. So I really don't have any authority to say either way. There's a lot of things I don't know, and so forth and so on. I just kind of felt bad for Orwell when I heard that story that they brought him back to the 21st century, and he dies 8 years later, and ends up a statue in a British Secret Service smoking lounge. It's a little bit less glorious than the Eternal Kingdom, but then again, as the Mexican cop in Blade Runner says, "We all die." But yeah, so it is very interesting nonetheless. It's an interesting opportunity to talk with someone who has been on a mission like that, and nonetheless, I'm very grateful for him sharing all that. So now we at least have some picture. At least I have a better picture of history. I've been a little bit of an ignoramus, I'll have to admit, dropping out of high school and all. But I like education. I like learning about stuff, and I just didn't like our education system, which I think is designed to make you prideful and stupid. I guess what I hope is that Orwell, even if he was not actually the king author of legend, but kind of a stand-in or some kind of anomaly that time shifted, I still kind of hope for him that at least he enjoyed the majority of his glory, which it looks like he did, because he almost looks like somewhat middle-aged in that from the description. But that the glory of his kingdom was for the most part enjoyed before he was whisked away to the future. So what happens is when Armstrong gets there, and he's been talking with King Arthur for a while and getting to understand what happened. In the course of talking with him, Armstrong reveals that he's from the future and starts talking to him about the situation. And what he's conveyed in his story was that Orwell's face, okay, so the guy supposedly, or might be, whatever, the real King Arthur, he started to like, frown in consternation, because he started to pout, like he's getting mad about what Armstrong is telling him, because and he said he didn't understand this at first, but then later thinking about it, he thought that basically what happened was that he just didn't understand what he was telling him. This guy from the future is trying to describe the situation of something not matching in the timeline and something. I don't know what else he told him, but basically he told him that because he knew he was a time traveler, because he said that was when he first met him, he says, "Boy, some fancy toys you got there," because he noticed that his armor was made of the finest metal he had ever seen. Right? Well, it's made out of titanium, it turns out. And it's from the future, even though they made it look like it's from the past. So, in the course of talking with him, Orwell starts to, I guess, suspect him. Like thinking that he might be an enemy or something. And what his subordinates report is that Merlin, or then called Murden, basically was starting to gather some troops outside, like a day's march away from where the no room was parked, and it looked like what was going to start to happen was that they were going to march on him. They were going to come and kill him or take him captive or something, because apparently Orwell was thinking that you know, this guy's bad news, and it turns out it was, because he's going to take him away from his whole kingdom. But in any case, so he, and so as the time is coming, it was like they were like one day away from coming, you know, the army was going to come, Arwell's army was going to come and arrest the time travelers, with Armstrong leading the way. By the way, he was 24 years old when he was leading this this whole charge, because they put him in charge of the mission. And but what happened was they found a way to drug him or capture him somehow, and they gave him some drugs to keep him quiet, you know, on the way back. But he basically, what he said was that he consented to being, you know, he grudgingly accepted being taken back to the future, because I don't know what the, you know, the exact circumstances are. But that was the wording that he used. He was grudgingly accepted being taken back to the future. But he said that he was bitter, you know, and I don't blame him. You know, he was taken out of his glorious kingdom and ended up being like a curiosity piece in a British Secret Service agency in the future, where he had, you know, no kingdom, no respect. He was just a curiosity piece time traveler that now is basically a fifth wheel, didn't really have a place. But apparently he continued doing his blacksmithing, but he was complaining because he was getting arthritis in his hands. He wasn't able to do his blacksmithing work, and it sounds a little bit sad actually, but as the guy once again from Blade Runner says, everyone dies, or he says, too bad she won't live, but then again, who does? So we all die, and probably not going to be in perfectly glorious, happy, hanging out with friends, happy-go-lucky, good times situation when you die. But that's why we're happy to be Christians, aren't we, friends? Because we know that there's something better if you make it, if you show yourself worthy, if you show yourself honorable. Do the Ten Commandments, be a righteous man in the faith of Jesus, and you'll make it.